Hello, my friends. It is good to be back with you guys this afternoon. It's been a quite a long time since I streamed last. The last time I even produced any content was pre-recorded, and I uploaded that to YouTube Monday. In any case, there's a lot to talk to. I'm a little tired, but we got to go through it anyway. There's a lot to talk about rather, related to the state of the church, and then I can just fill you guys in on some updates of what's going on in my life and some future potential chances to either interact with me or what have you. But in general, today I want to just really focus on Pope Francis's new Motu Proprio Traditionis Custodes. He conveniently dropped that right when I went on vacation. It was almost like he was waiting. He was just waiting for me to go on vacation, so I couldn't respond via stream. I could only use a little bit of Twitter to repost some things and bring in some of the kind of the preamble for tonight related to Quo Premium and other papal documents of that sort that can help us understand where this document is greatly imprudent and frankly can be considered utterly null and void. And I'll get into why that is. Though it is a bit embarrassing from me. I just do this long spiel on my YouTube channel about where the authority of the church comes from and the authority of the Pope and why the church and the Pope always has authority. But I left it up because in there I explicitly said that there are going to be times when it's going to be more ambiguous. I mentioned things that Francis may have done, and I said I would address that in other streams, and so that's what I'm going to do today, address times in which things that the church, quote-unquote, has decreed, that really the church hasn't decreed at all. It's not the church acting, it's rather some individual person acting in simply the name of the church, but Christ is not acting whatsoever. And how are we able to determine these things without being individualists? So that is something I hope to answer today. So yeah, we're gonna go through the Motu Proprio, talk about the implications. What is it? Where does it go wrong? What is like the bad parts of it? And then what are some of the silver lining, or what is some of the aspects of this Motu Proprio that can be that we can kind of see as optimistic, that we can be optimistic about, not so much the Motu Proprio, but rather the effects of the Motu Proprio, if there are any. So I'll get into that as well. And then I'll also just finish up with just how should we move going forward? How should you move going forward? How should I move going forward? And by that, I just mean lay people, average people like ourselves. So that's the schedule, the itinerary for today. It should be a long stream since it's a long Motu Proprio, but it's necessary to go through it. I got a bunch of documents to read through, a bunch of quotes to talk about. So yeah, buckle yourselves in. It's going to be a good one, though. I hope you guys like it. So I appreciate that. It's good to see Tucker. I miss this guy. He says, what is he saying here? The Pope Boniface, the 8th stream was so good. Thank you, big guy. I appreciate that. It was one of my favorite streams personally, too. If you haven't seen that stream, make sure to check it out. Talking about the crisis in the modern world, where it all began, really. All right. Was AR named in the Motu Proprio? No, but it isn't tacit. It was tacitly implied that the Pope knew I was going on vacation. That's why he released it the Friday I was taking a plane, and I was in the airport. About ready to get on my flight to Colorado, and I was checking Twitter, and then I see Scott Greer say that, the Catholics on the timeline are going to be very upset. The Pope has released a new Motu Proprio. And I was like, wait, what? What's happening? And so then I was like reading through it, and I was watching a bunch of commentaries on YouTube. And since then, I've been able to just really kind of the intensity for which I want to like go through this, and the vexation I have, though it's a righteous anger. It's not not trying to be vindictive or anything like that, but just my frustration with some of these things going on right now has been building, And so there's a lot I really needed to like get off my chest, I guess you could say. That's the best way to put it. There's a lot that has been building up, and I got a lot to get off my chest. I didn't really make like a solid notes for this, so I'm just gonna go off kind of cuff here, and we'll see what happens. But just some like housekeeping things that I should mention. I recently got laid off. It wasn't my fault. The company just like the contract expired. That's what I was getting at. The contract expired, so I no longer have the job I was working with at the security company. And it wasn't really like a long-term job anyway, so it's not really a big deal. I know some people were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." It's like it's not really a big deal. It was not a long-term job. What was supposed to be a long-term job was the job in Florida as a financial advisor. However, after a lot of prayer and careful just contemplation, I turned down the job. Ultimately, I realized it just was not something that I wanted to do. It's not something that I think would be fulfilling for me. And I was probably because of my stream on the caste system and just thinking about my own role and my own purpose in life. And it's not to be rich, or it's not to be materialistic. That's not really for me. That stuff is not going to sustain me in any sense. I like to teach. That's what I'm doing here. And since I'm not going to grad school, I'm going to try to look for teaching jobs at Catholic schools or private schools where you don't need a master's degree. If I can't do that, I'll just be a substitute teacher for a year. In any case, I just want to teach. I realize that's what I'm passionate about. That's what I enjoy to do. That's what I do here on the show. Is I try to teach you guys. I don't know how well of a job I do, but I try my best, and that's what I derive, a lot of fulfillment and life meaning from. And so I decided to turn down this job. Could have made 6 figures, turned it down, so that I could be with you guys and keep doing the show, keep teaching people. And I think it's for a good cause. It's for a, I think it'll be in the end. I think it'll be for the best. And the workplace environment was especially materialistic. These people were obsessed with making money. A lot of them were on Adderall, and the the greed is good kind of stereotype of Wall Street 100% fit a lot of these people's personas, unfortunately. And so yeah, I'm glad I left that kind of industry. Not for me. Let me just get a drink of water here. All right, so since I no job, I'm almost done with summer school, and I have no future job to prepare for besides starting to turn in my resume to schools, what have you. Since I have now a lot more time on my hands, I'm thinking about doing a trip up north to see some family members of mine who support my show. I was able to interact with some of them in Colorado at the wedding, it was a beautiful wedding. I was up in the mountains in Estes Park. I don't know if you've ever been there or seen pictures. It's amazing. It's gorgeous. Picture perfect. I posted some of those pictures on my Instagram, posted a lot more on my Snapchat, but I'm not giving that away to most of you guys. Some pictures with me in shorts, so if you ever wanted to see me in shorts, it was on my Snapchat. Any case, it was a great vacation. I've never seen so many white people before. I'm so used to California. I'm just so phased, so numbed to the demographic change. When I was in Colorado, I was like, there's so many white people. This is amazing. And it's like it awoken something in me. Like usually when you go and you see like Mexican women or women of other races, it just doesn't do anything for me. It's like, okay. And it's just probably why I've always like preferred 2D women. But then I see these I go to this wedding. It was done by my Protestant cousin, and so there's all these like Protestant, very modestly dressed, good-natured young women. And I'm like, wow, okay, maybe I will get married after all. Maybe there's some like future for me here. So that was inspiring for me and kind of like changed my paradigm a little bit. That being said, of course, we're never gonna simp, never gonna choose e-girls, but there are good, it looks like, at least on the surface, prima facie, could be wrong, but on the surface, just like attending this very devout Protestant wedding, which are very weird, by the way, very different than Catholic weddings. Catholic weddings are far superior. Like, it was like 1, really short, and then 2, like they like did communion, and like they just drank wine and then ate some bread, and I'm just thinking, what are they doing? What are they thinking is going on right now? They're like, because they're evangelicals or non-denominational or something like that. It's like, oh, they just eat something and then they just think really hard about Jesus, and it's like you just stripped all the potency of the Holy Eucharist away by saying that it's simply symbolic. In any case, that's a great conversation for another time. And my cousin and I, he's a Lutheran, and Lutherans have I think they have a much more nuanced view on it. So me and him were both like making fun of the evangelicals. It was a jolly good time. We're being a little cheeky. But I was talking to him, and he is actually really a big fan of the show, and so I might visit him. He lives up in like kind of the Northwest. So if you live in the Northwest and you know me and you're in the Discord and are interested in connecting with me, let me know. I know some of you who are, and I'm already gonna try to reach out to you guys to do like a meetup, just to like hang out, talk about things, maybe go to you guys' churches, see what they're like. If you guys are interested. So I'll be in that area. So reach out to me on Discord if you live up there. Anything else I wanted to bring up? I think that covers it. If I think of anything else, because there was a lot that happened these last few weeks. So I always forget if there might be something else going on in my life I just didn't bring up. In any case, let's just jump right into this document. So it was released, Traditionis Custodes, which means, by the way, like the custodians or the guardians of tradition, which is very on the nose right there. The guardians of tradition, as if Pope Francis was some fiduciary, had some fiduciary role guarding the treasure that is our tradition as Catholics. This is like this feels to me like when Joe Biden's press secretary said that Joe Biden was opposed to defund the police, and that Donald Trump was really the one who was defunding the police. It was this weird manipulative like way to gaslight people. It feels very similar calling this document Traditionis Custodes. Yes, so it's very much like doublespeak in a sense. It's kind of Orwellian. I know that's kind of like a boomer thing, but still, it has that kind of aspect to it. The fact that they're saying, no, we're the real guardians of tradition. So yeah, let's just read through this. We'll get through the whole document, and I'll just kind of, as we go, discuss the implications and what it means and what have you, and where there are serious issues with this document. Okay, so it starts here saying, guardians of tradition. The bishops in communion with the Bishop of Rome constitute the visible principle and foundation of the unity of their particular churches. That is all true. They are the visible principle and foundation of the unity of their particular churches, so long as they're acting within their proper function and doing their duty according to their natural role, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit through the proclamation of the gospel. By means of the celebration of the Eucharist, they govern the particular churches entrusted to them. Alright, there's nothing too bad there. In order to promote the concord and unity of the Church with paternal solicitude towards those who in any region adhere to liturgical forms antecedent to the reform willed by the Vatican Council II, which is somewhat debatable. Vatican Council II's Sacrosanctum Concilium basically says that the liturgy needs to be more accessible to the faithful, that the liturgy needs to be, the faithful need to have a more participatory role in the liturgy, but it doesn't call for the abrogation of the Latin Mass. It doesn't call for the creation of an entirely new rite. That's all it says. And it says that the organ should still be used. It says the Mass should still be reverent. So this is a bit debatable. My venerable predecessors, St. John Paul II and Benedict XVI, granted and regulated the faculty to use the Roman Missal edited by John the 23rd in 1962. In this way, they intended to, quote, to facilitate the ecclesiastical communion of those Catholics who feel attached to some earlier liturgical form and not to others. Which is basically to say that the only reason Benedict XVI released Summorum Pontificum and John Paul II in his Ecclesia Dei allowed for a more liberal use of the Latin Mass is because it was to facilitate the ecclesiastical communion with basically older Catholics who weren't able to move on. They weren't able to move on. They're too stuck in their ways. That's the attitude that is being expressed here, that they were too stuck in their ways, and therefore they would allow them to have the Latin Mass. Since they just couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle the new one. When in reality, it is really the opposite. It is the young people who are going to the Latin Mass. It is, you go to a Latin Mass, you see these large families, you see these vibrant youths, you see young priests, you see all these new seminarians. I think I saw something from Eric Stryker that for every seven traditional priests going into the seminary, there's only one Novus Ordo priest. So we saw these seminarians, these large families, they're all young and youthful. And that is what scares the church. That is really why the Pope is doing this. As their back is against the wall, and I'll probably go into that more later on. But for some context, if you don't know, John Paul II, Saint John Paul II, he basically allowed any priest to say the Latin Mass with the bishop's permission. Benedict XVI made it even more accessible to people by saying that any priest in any diocese whatsoever, they don't need the permission of the bishop. They can say the Latin Mass because the Latin Mass has always been one of the forms of the liturgy. And he said that the church has two forms of liturgy, the extraordinary form, the ordinary form, that it's bifurcated, and that is hotly contested, I think, by traditional theologians, but in any case, that's what he said. And at the very least, that would be true, that it has two valid and licit forms of the Mass. But if anything, there's only one valid and licit form of the Mass, and that's the Mass that has always been used. Alright, but moving on from that, it says, in line with the initiative of my venerable predecessors, Benedict XVI, to invite the bishops to assess the application of the Motu Proprio Summorum Pontificum 3 years after its publication. So its last was released back, I think, in 2003 or 2005. And this document is basically reversing everything in it. That is basically the intent of Pope Francis here, is to work towards the abrogation of the Latin Mass, to work towards what he calls unity, which I think is funny, since this is only going to cause more division within the church, as there's a lot of people that are very, you could say that they're not like traditionalist in the sense, but they're kind of just conservative Catholics, but who tend to Latin Mass, because generally it's the more reverent form. There's a lot of liturgical abuses that are prevalent in Novus Ordo, on the Novus Ordo Rite, and for that reason, a lot of conservative Catholics go to the traditional Mass, and so they're going to be very divided now. There'll be a lot more division within the church, which is going to be, it's going to cause a lot less unity. And there's nothing more like divisive, I think, than like, or more not divisive, but more different. Like there's more a diversity. There's no uniformity within the Novus Ordo. For one, the actual liturgy itself gives, I think, 3 different like prayers for the canon of the Mass, which is very odd, I've always thought. One of them is like the one that's most often uses the really short version. Is like I heard it called like Instant Jesus before. In any case, so there's usually, and then there's also like lots of different local customs, and the music is always different, and there's a lot of variation between Novus Ordo masses. You go to one in one side of town and the other in another side, and they can be completely different. One side has something that's extremely reverent and similar in like just similar to the reverence paid towards the Eucharist as the Latin Mass, and another one feels like a clown Mass. It feels very like a Protestant service or something like that. So you have a lot of diversity within the Novus Ordo auspices, and yet within the Latin Mass is the exact opposite. They have very strict rubrics, very strict codes on how to do things. The liturgy is very precise in what you have to do, when to genuflect, when to kneel, etc. Even when it comes to the music, that there's like every season has a different chant, and it's all structured, and So you go to one Latin Mass on one side of town, and you go to another side, and it's going to be the exact same thing. And so, yeah, it's very odd that he would be trying to promote unity by basically going with the liturgy that is the most, ununified. At this time, having considered, the document continues here, at this time, having considered the wishes expressed by the episcopate, and having heard the opinion of the congregation for the doctrine of faith, I'd love to see where, in writing, everything they said was, so we know which bishops are modernists. I'd love to see a full exposition of who was whispering Pope Francis here and these opinions that he's heard. I now desire with this apostolic letter to press on evermore in the constant search for ecclesiastical communion. Therefore, I've considered appropriate to establish the following. And then he's going to go through these articles here. For one, I heard it said, either was in this document, I think it was an appendum to this document, which, by the way, this document, there's only one official, English translation. There's only one official translation, and that's in English. I think the other is in Italian. So the Pope knew that it was because in the UK and in the United States, the Latin Mass has a very large community. It was not an accident. And it's been said that this has kind of been applied to these restrictions are coming down because of a guilt by association. Perhaps the Pope finally checked his replies on Twitter to see who was ratioing him or something like that. Maybe he was checking just the nooks of Catholic Twitter. Well, you'll get some very autistic people on Catholic Twitter who will say things that are very imprudent and uncharitable. Things like, oh, the Pope's a heretic, or we have an anti-Pope, sedevacantist, things of this sort. Perhaps the Pope saw that, and that was the unity within the church that he was responding to. In any case, this is an anomaly, and for that reason, the Pope decided that was the pretense on which the Pope has acted, was that he's seen this unity within the church, and that the Latin Mass is being hijacked by all these radical traditionalists who reject the magisterium of the church and want some parallel church. That is kind of the underlying tone here for which he is able to promulgate this document, which is very erroneous, because just in general the idea of this guilt by association is fallacious. Just because there might be some of these people on the outskirts of Twitter, it does not mean that this represents at all the most your average Latin Mass goer who is just trying to understand the state of the church and trying to just do the best they can to live a holy life in this very confusing time. I also find it very interesting that the Pope goes to great lengths trying to restrict the Latin Mass when he did absolutely nothing about the sodomites in Germany who are blessing same-sex unions. Or rather, the priests who are blessing same-sex unions. They're blessing sodomy. Maybe that might have been a Freudian slip. Maybe these priests are sodomites too. But in any case, there's also been a myriad of sex scandals that the church has to deal with, and financial scandals. And so it's why would Pope Francis be focused on the one group that is actually remain faithful to the church? Why would Pope Francis focus on the one group that is actually trying to maintain the faith in its entirety? And I'll go through the statistics in a moment to prove that is true. Why not focus on the loss of faith that we've seen after COVID, but especially after Vatican II, amongst lay people within the Novus Ordo Church? And why not focus on, again, these German bishops or German priests who are blessing these sodomites? Why not focus on politicians who claim to be Catholic and then support things that are intrinsically evil? There's so much going on in the church for which Pope Francis should be spilling a great deal of energy trying to restrict, restrain, condemn, control, anathematize, and declare countries on interdict. But instead, this is what he decides to focus on, is to persecute the people who are the most faithful, to rain down these restrictions on people who merely want to express their faith in the most sincere form they can. which is very disheartening, I'm sure, but we cannot lose hope. We cannot lose hope. Remember that. All right, let's go through some of these here. It says Article 1, the liturgical books promulgated by St. Paul the Fourth and St. Paul the Sixth and John Paul II, in conformity with the decrees. Man, I'm having a tough time today. Decrees of Vatican II are the unique expression of the lex orandi of the Roman Rite. Said in another way, the Novus Ordo is the only rite of the Church. And that is the lex orandi, means the law of our prayer. And is the only valid prayer, or not the only valid prayer, but like the only true prayer. It kind of leaves the Latin Mass in some limbo. It doesn't really say, okay, then what is the Latin Mass? If the Novus Ordo is the unique expression, the Novus Ordo Missa is the unique expression of the lex orandi of the Roman Rite, then what is the Latin Mass? And that, of course, is nonsensical, both from previous popes like Benedict XVI and Summorum Pontificum says, in no uncertain terms, that the Latin Mass had never been abrogated since Vatican II. Vatican II just created, I guess you could say, some parallel rite or some new rite on top of the Latin Mass. The two rites have always, or the Latin Mass has always existed. It was codified at the Council of Trent and through Quo Premium, a bull by Pius V, which I'll be reading shortly. What you should also know, as this is something I was looking at this SSPX article here, and it talks about everything going on, and it brings up this really interesting commission by Cardinal Alphonse Stickler. It was a commission of 9 cardinals. It was held in 1986. It was requested by Pope John Paul II, and they had to answer 2 questions. The first is if it were possible for a bishop to prevent a priest from celebrating the Tridentine Mass. Tridentine Mass meaning the Mass that comes from the Council of Trent, or the Latin Mass, as it's usually called, traditional Latin Mass. And the unanimous answer among these cardinals was no, a bishop could never stop a priest from celebrating it. The second question was if it was possible to ever forbid Latin Mass. And 8 cardinals answered no, it was impossible to ever forbid the Latin Mass. That'd be ridiculous. And 1 answered yes. And we'll go into why exactly it would be impossible to forbid the Latin Mass, and why it would be impossible for just the Novus Ordo to be the unique expression of the lex orandi, the law of prayer. And again, obviously, Benedict XVI, Summorum Pontificum, just corroborates this. I don't want to kind of reveal the cat of the bag yet and go, because Quo Premium, just boom, is like just a punch in the face. It's probably, it's talk about, very forceful documents. It's definitely up there. So I'll get to that one in a moment, but I kind of want to get through all these first. All right, Article 2. Let me get some more. Article 2, it belongs to the diocesan bishop as moderator, promoter, and guardian of the whole liturgical life of the particular church entrusted to him. Okay, true, to regulate the liturgical celebrations of his diocese. So he should be regulating them by forbidding liturgical abuses like communion in the hand and standing and guitar masses, and he should be trying to promote more reverent services. Yes, very true. He should be regulating liturgical celebrations. Therefore, it is his exclusive competence to authorize the use of the 1962 Missal in his diocese. No, it is not, according to the guidelines of the Apostolic See. But basically what it's saying here on paper is that the bishop is going to be the one who is entrusted now to regulate and to confirm the Latin Mass. And so if the bishop doesn't like the Latin Mass, as many of these bishops don't, then he can just remove it at will. And it's very interesting. It's like all these boomers. It's usually these boomers, like Pope Francis, who they grew up during the time of the council, and so they see that the Latin Mass is like a slap in their face. They are the generation that gave us Vatican II, and so their generation is very upset that our generation, the new generation, who never had a chance to speak up at the Vatican II or after all the changes that had occurred, that we are, we want to be able to choose for ourselves tradition, but the boomers, they're very upset that we've kind of basically rejected all their hard work. We have turned our backs on it, and kind of to spite us, I've noticed that there's a lot of resentment towards the old Latin Mass. It seems kind of Pope Francis is manifesting that here. And that is probably why they're so worried right now, and why they're like Pope Francis is releasing this document, like he said, contacting the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith and working with bishops, is because they see that the Latin Mass community is exploding in the church. The Latin Mass community is the future of the church. That is where all the young people are. All the boomers are and Gen Xers are in the Novus Ordo, and they're like at half capacity, if that. We go to Novus Ordo masses, and like not that many people go to a Latin mass. It's packed. I bet it's going to be even more packed soon, and that people are noticing. If this was something that was not a big deal, if this was some like niche, small thing, Vatican wouldn't be worried about it. The Vatican would care less. But the fact that this represents a legitimate threat to the safety of these modernists and to the future of modernism within the church, and the future of the Vatican II, the spirit of Vatican II at least, and the reforms that have come out, the post-conciliar reforms, the fact that these are now in danger is very threatening to Pope Francis, is very threatening, and that is why they have to respond. And that is a positive thing. That is something that we can be proud of. We can relish in, is the fact that we are the future. And the Pope knows it, and that is why the Pope has to do the one thing he can do. He can't throw theology at us. He can't condemn us for being heretics, because we are in perfect line with what the Church has always taught. What he can do is try to manipulate the Code of Canon Law. He could try to flex the Code of Canon Law in his pastoral teaching to fit his modernist needs. And that is what a Motu Proprio is, by the way. It's like a way to directly change canon law, or to add something to canon law without having to like go through and like revise it and say, okay, here's a new canon law book or something like that. Instead, it's kind of just like an appendium where they add it to canon law directly, almost like an executive order. So this is executive order coming out from the Pope, trying to abrogate and suppress the Latin Mass. Why? Because they know it is the future. They know that this represents a serious threat, and if we lose hope, then we allow them to win. We lose hope, we allow them the pleasure of victory. We cannot do that. We have to remind ourselves that we right now have the high ground, and that we must maintain that. All right, let's see where else. What else does this document say? The bishop of the diocese in which now there exist one or more groups that celebrate according to the Missal enters into the Reform in 1970, and there's a bunch of subpoints here. These subpoints are considered like the most draconian of all the measures that this document enforces. Subsection 1 says, the bishop is to determine what these groups, that these groups do not deny the validity and legitimacy of the liturgical reform dictated by Vatican Council II and the magisterium of the Supreme Pontiffs. Very strong language there. It's funny because Pope Francis always talks about not being rigid and being very conciliatory, but with the traditionalists, yes, I bring a heavy hand. The magisterium, the Supreme Pontiffs, they're the ones that are giving you these liturgical reforms, and they must be valid and legitimate. And so, how are these bishops going to determine this? I have no idea, but that is, again, this is kind of like a guilt by association. It's like, it is determined that these groups do not deny the validity, and I very rarely have met anyone who denies the validity of the Novus Ordo. The legitimacy, meaning whether or not it's illicit, is a different story, and I've met some people who reject that, but it's like, again, this is like a kind of a minority position. And it seems like this is kind of more of just an excuse. It's like, oh, okay, well, the bishop can say, oh, I think these groups, I talked to some of them, and some of the people in attend are a little bit goofy, they're a little bit out there with some of their theology, so I'm going to shut down these groups, which is never defined, by the way, what these groups are, though I assume they're the FSSP and fraternity, which is the Fraternity of St. Peter and the Institute of Christ the King, and these Ecclesia Dei groups that were created under John Paul II to basically retain and to celebrate the Latin Mass. Subsection 2 says, is to designate one or more locations where the faithful adherents of these groups may gather for a Eucharistic celebration, not, however, in parochial churches, and without the erection of new personal parishes, which is extremely draconian. Why can't they have new personal parishes? I don't understand why they can't have a new one. It's like there's no reason for that except to just basically try to smash out any new attempts to spread the Latin Mass. And they can't be in parochial churches, so I guess they'll have to go to oratories or cemeteries and what have you. So they're making it very clear that this is not to be in the parochial church. And subsection 3 says, to establish at the designated location the days on which Eucharistic celebrations are permitted using the Roman Missal promulgated by John the 23rd in 1962. In these celebrations, the readings are proclaimed in the vernacular language, using translations of the sacred scripture approved for the liturgical use by the respective episcopal conferences. Are proclaimed in the vernacular language? Do they know what the Latin Mass is? It's in Latin. The entire Mass is in Latin. The homily is actually, or the sermon is not a part of the Mass. That is why the priest takes off his maniple, or he takes off the chasuble, or at least he should. Sometimes they can't really take it off just because of how small the chapel is, so they take off the maniple. They make some indication by taking off some garment, usually, that this is not a part of the Mass. They wear the biretta, and so the homily, which is the only thing that is in English or in the vernacular, is not a part of the Mass. That is why, this is not a requirement. In daily masses, some of them have homilies, though. Usually they don't. They kind of just skip that part. When I was serving masses for the SSPX, they had a priestly conference, and obviously these were private masses the priest had to say. The priest have to say mass every single day. And so obviously they're not going to give a homily to just me. So they just went right through it. So it's not something that is required. Interestingly, perhaps you didn't know that. But that is why it's ludicrous to say that they have to read off the scriptures in the vernacular. Maybe they can, I know some places they'll read off the scriptures before the homily in the vernacular, and this is kind of just a local custom. It's not in the missal or anything like that. Perhaps that'll suffice. Hopefully that'll suffice. The bishop will approve that as sufficient to meet this requirement, but the idea that the FSSP is now going to start chanting the gospel in English would basically be to say that they're not following the rubrics of the Mass. They would make the Mass de facto illicit if they're not following the rubrics. All right. Most people at the Novus Ordo don't even know what Vatican II is. I don't think they do. Subsection 4, to appoint a priest who, as delegate of the bishop, is entrusted with these celebrations and with the pastoral care of these groups of faithful. The priest should be suited for this responsibility, skilled in the use of the Missale Romanum, antecedent to the Reform in 1970, possess a knowledge of the Latin language sufficient for a thorough comprehension of the rubrics and liturgical texts, and be animated by a lively pastoral charity and by a sense of ecclesiastical communion. A lot of flowery, woolly, banal platitudes kind of listed here, and they're no one would obviously reject this. Obviously, they have to have pastoral charity, be animated, and be able to know Latin. The reason why they, at least on its face, it seems the reason these are included is to give bishops rather, an excuse to take away the Latin Mass. They say, oh, well, this priest is kind of rigid, or this priest, he doesn't know enough Latin. He only studied it for 2 years. I think he should study it for at least 5. And so there's just, they can find these little, excuses in canon law to take it away. This priest should have at heart not only the correct celebration of the liturgy, but also the pastoral and spiritual care of the lay faithful. Again, another just platitude there. Subsection 5 says to proceed suitably to verify that the parishes canonically erected for the benefit of these faithful are effective for their spiritual growth and to determine whether or not to retain them. So yeah, the bishop basically can determine whether or not to retain these Latin Mass parishes, or these priests who are saying Latin Mass, whether or not to retain the antecedent form of the Roman Rite. 6 says to take care not to authorize the establishment of new groups, which again, that's very, like, what is a new group? Is that like a new society, like a new fraternity of St. Peter, something like that? Or is it any group whatsoever? Clearly, whatever it is, whatever he means by groups, it just is a way to stop any new Latin masses from being formed. It's kind of the objective there. Whatever, basically freeze all the Latin masses that are in place, kill off as many as the bishops can, and then make sure that no new ones grow. That is basically the objective, which is going to make it very difficult for all the new seminarians, given how many new seminarians are coming into these traditional groups. It's going to be, I guess, tough with all these new regulations to be able to find parishes and what have you. Article 4 says, priest ordained with the publication of the present Motu Proprio who wish to celebrate using the Missale Romanum of 1962 should submit a formal, this is the most like draconian of them all, must or should submit a formal request to the diocesan bishop, who shall consult the Apostolic See before granting this authorization. This is a prior rule to Ecclesia Dei by John Paul II. John Paul II said you didn't have to consult the Apostolic See, you just had to consult your diocesan bishop. The diocesan bishop has to consult the Apostolic See before he can grant some, I guess, supra faculty to authorize the diocesan bishop saying the Latin Mass. That is ridiculous. That is and of course the Apostolic See, so long as Pope Francis is its head, is not going to probably approve any new priests. Or at least they'll find ways, they'll make it really long, or have some indefinite process, or it'll get lost in the mail, the letter. They'll find ways to make it ridiculously hard. Basically impossible. Priests who already celebrate according to the Missale Romanum of 1962 should request from the diocesan bishop the authorization to continue to enjoy this faculty. Basically saying there that priests who are already saying the Latin Mass, that grandfathered in, so long as they ask for the permission of the diocesan bishop, which would suck if your diocesan bishop is a modernist. And so good luck to those guys. I already heard of I think the bishop in Arkansas has done away with all the Latin masses there, except for the fraternity of St. Peter. Other bishops, though, have taken a lot more friendly stance, a lot more amiable stance towards the Latin Mass. Bishop Strickland in Texas, he has said, in no uncertain terms will the Latin Mass be abrogated in my diocese. Bishop of San Francisco, I forget his name, Alexander Sample, the bishop there. Who else? I don't remember all of them, but a lot of bishops have come forward and basically said that no changes so far. Some of them have said they're going to look into these changes, but so far I haven't, I'm kind of seen a mixed bag. There are some bishops who are really standing up for the faithful, which is something we did not see in the 1970s, for example. A lot of people are saying, oh, we're back in the 1970s now, right after Vatican II, when the Novus Ordo Missae is published and Paul VI basically de facto is trying to abrogate the Latin Mass. And then you see all these clown masses and these the most ridiculous, the most absurd of liturgical abuses that are coming about. And the only one that was faithful to tradition was the Bishop Castromayor, and Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. That was it. You had some renegade priests who were going around saying the Latin Mass, but no one in the diocese, no one either had to swallow that Vatican II in the new Mass, or they would have to become a renegade and try to find some private chapel. That was it. All you had was Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. He was the only ecclesiastic who was standing up, prince of the church who was standing up for tradition at that time. And the silver lining behind this whole document is that he's proved 100% correct. The fact that he distanced himself from the modernist in Rome proves today to be 100% prudent, to be 100% correct. When he consecrated those bishops in 1988, it is proved today that we are in a state of emergency. The Latin Mass is being threatened, and he was 100% correct to continue his society. He was 100% justified and vindicated to continue the use of his seminary, to continue the use of the Tridentine form of the Mass. That is the silver lining behind this, is that Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, this schismatic, as these neo-Catholics will call him, these neo-traditionalist Catholics will like to say, his group is going to be the only one, the SSPX is going to be the only one that is going to be completely and totally unaffected by this Motu Proprio, because it has remained true to tradition and not to modernism. So it is the I guess you could say the one, or there's a few, but the one of the the strongest, I guess, benefits that come from as an effect, not from like a direct effect, but kind of an implicit effect, is that there is no more doubt that the Society of St. Pius X was in the right. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre is in the right to continue and to try to preserve and transmit the Latin Mass, so that it would not be extinguished, neither in the 1970s or today. And in the 1970s, man, it was a dark time. It was a dark time. Imagine the faith that Marcel Lefebvre had. The faith that compelled him to continue the seminary, even while it was the only seminary in the entire world that was teaching orthodoxy and the venerable rite that the church had always used for the last 2,000 years. And now he was the only one that was standing up. And he was standing up against very dark and sinister forces. Today, we live in much more fortunate times because of the brave stand Marcel Lefebvre took, because of the brave stand Castro Mayer took, because of the heroic pursuance of the traditions of the church and their conservation of our sacred liturgy. Because of what they did, we have today, we have Cardinal Burke, we have Athanasius Schneider, we have the Apostolic Nuncio. What's his name again? I forget his name. That guy, the Apostolic Nuncio in the United States. Someone can help me with that. And then you, who else? You can think of the names. Bishop Strickland. You can think of all these very conservative, traditionalist-minded. Some of them are varying points, but still they care about the Latin Mass and in charity want to preserve it. We have these people because of Marcel Lefebvre. That is why tradition is able to survive today. So do not give in to despair. Despair is a sin. That is one. There's 3 theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. Hope. Vigano. Thank you, Artistic Riper. My brain just completely forgot. For some reason, blanked on that. Yes, Archbishop Vigano, great guy, love him. He's the Apostolic Nuncio. So yeah, Archbishop Vigano. We wouldn't have someone like that today if it wasn't for the stance that these traditionalists took in the past, our forefathers, basically. And we should look up to them, and we should appreciate the fact that they were able to resist these changes, and thank God that we have them today. And so yeah, do not give in to despair. Despair is a sin, and it is a vice. It is contrary to the virtue of hope, and we're in a much better place than in the 1970s. And like I said earlier, we are going to win. That is why the church is doing this. That is why the church is trying to do everything they can within their power, their magisterial power through canon law, in order to suppress us, because they do not have the theological high ground. So instead, they have to try to wield whatever power they have, because their back is against the wall. They know their time is up. They know that the tradition is rising. And while it might be dark, dawn is just a few hours away. And that is something we have to remember. The church, she is in her crisis right now. She is in her passion, just as Christ had to suffer his passion, and just as Christ rose again 3 days later and received a glorified body, so too does the church, who is united to Christ, is going to have to endure her passion, but she will resurrect again into this glorified form. And that is what we have to look forward to. That is what we have to look forward to. We cannot become myopic. We cannot be fixated on the things happening today. We have to look forward to what is to come. And I know it's easy to get discouraged. That is what Satan wants. That is exactly what Satan wants. And you have to remind yourselves of like the apostles, the disciples of Jesus. On Good Friday, they had just, heard that Jesus had been condemned to death. I think John witnessed it, but most of the apostles, or the disciples rather, were hiding in the upper room in fear of the Jews. That is what the scripture says. They were afraid that their heads would be next, that they would get the chopping block. I'm sure they were absolutely, utterly devastated because their savior, their Messiah, had just died a criminal's death. Just like all the other quote-unquote messiahs that had come about in Jewish history that promised to lead a revolt against the Romans, and they'd all been killed for their troubles. And they thought, well, Jesus, he's different, he's special, but he too had just been crucified. And so I'm sure they were at, this really dark time, and they had forgotten somehow, for some reason, that Jesus said that he would come back and that he would be gone for a while, and then he would come and rise again. But in any case, they did forget that. They were myopic. We don't want to be like that. You don't want to be fixated on the current situation. And so when Jesus did rise again, imagine the joy, imagine the jubilance that they must have been experiencing when they saw the risen Lord, that he had conquered death, that he was not like the frauds of the past, but truly he was the Son of God, came down to humanity to save us, who erected the church on St. Peter. And it will be through St. Peter and his successor that the church will be ultimately saved. And will that be the next pope? Will that be a pope like 5 lines from now? Who knows? God knows. But eventually that'll happen. And I do believe that it'll be through probably the pope. That I saw Michael Matt, he made that point. I thought that was a good point. That was the institution that Christ has used, and right now the pope is abusing his authority. But Christ will remind us and restore it. The repristination of the papacy is coming soon. So that is what we have to look forward to. That is what we must be grounded in. We cannot lose hope. It's very important to remind you. I will say it a million times because I can easily see people losing their mortal souls because of something like this, and that's exactly what Satan wants. That's exactly what the devil wants, and we cannot let him get the upper hand. It's really easy to jump off the ship now, but if you're not faithful to the church when she is at her darkest times, then when the church is being reborn in glory, when she is given this, when she is going to be restored to her former magnificence, you won't be worthy of the church then. You have to be faithful now so that you might be worthy of the church later on. All right. Where was I in this? Kind of a long tangent, but all true. We have to remain hopeful for the future. All right. Article 6, Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life erected by the Pontifical Commission Ecclesia Dei, i.e. the FSSP and Institute of Christ the King, fall under the competence of the Congregation for the Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies for Apostolic Life, which is a really long title. Can they please shorten that? In any case, this is a really liberal group. The prefect for this congregation, forget his name, but he is a modernist, and he's also the one that shut down the Franciscans of the Immaculate, which was this Latin Mass group that was started. It was a smaller one, and they basically tore it down, were able to dissolve it. Article 7. So we'll see what happens with these FSSP and Institute of Christ the King. They're about to endure a lot of persecution. The Congregation for Divine Worship and the Apostolic, and the Discipline of the Sacraments and Congregation for the Institute of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life, for matters of their particular competence, exercise the authority of the Holy See with respect to the observance of these provisions. Basically, they are no longer, I think it was under the Congregation for Divine Liturgy. They were originally under the FSSP and Institute of Christ the King. So this new group is basically acting with the competence of the Pope. And Article 8 says previous norms, instructions, permissions, and customs that do not conform to the revisions of the present Motu Proprio are abrogated, which is to say basically the Summorum Pontificum has just been abrogated, and that is very unfortunate. And then this is where the Pope really tries to flex his muscles here. Everything that I've declared in this apostolic letter in the form of the Motu Proprio, I order to be observed in all its parts. Anything else to the contrary notwithstanding, even if worthy of particular mention, and I establish that it be promulgated by way of publication in La Osservatore Romano, I think that's how you say that, entering immediately in force. That's just very interesting. It says entering immediately in force. That is something I would never expect. Even Quo Premium, which I'm about to read, was not immediate. It gave time to transition. So it was immediate in force, and when it was a hit Friday, so a lot of these bishops were shocked and like they had to give permission to all these diocesan priests to continue to say Latin Mass on Sunday while they were reeling, trying to figure out how to react based on this. And subsequently, that it be published in the official commentary of the Holy See, Acta Apostolicae Sedis. Boom. All right. It must be observed in all its parts. So yeah, the Pope decides to finally flex his muscles against the one community, the one group that is in conformity with the Church and her perennial teaching. Because you hate to see that. It's like, can the Pope please go after the modernist or after the people who are demanding that women become priests or things of that nature? Or Father James Martin. Instead of praising Father James Martin, can he please defrock him? So yeah, this is the unfortunate state of the Church, but again, we cannot give up hope. And I'll go into now why this Motu Proprio really has no force. I should mention that I'm not really I am surprised by this. Like, I heard rumors from various people, like Dr. Taylor Marshall had said that something like this was coming, and I was kind of skeptical. I really doubted that Pope Francis would do this during the lifetime of Benedict. Like, Benedict is still alive. I know he's old, but he's still alive. Like, I just, it's like a huge slap in the face to Benedict. So that's really, so that was surprising to me. The force of it was very surprising. The fact that he's so direct about his intent to go after the Latin Mass is very surprising. This probably is the most radical thing Francis has done, and one of the most dangerous things. Amoris Laetitia was very dangerous, but it was dangerous in a very different sense, since it like kind of allowed some theological heresies to creep in through these really subtle footnotes, unlike this, which is very direct and to the point. Amoris Laetitia was very indirect, and they tried to use these like footnotes to weave in what appears to be on its face heresy, that divorced and remarried Catholics could receive Holy Communion. So I remember that whole fiasco, and that was pretty crazy. But this seems like, I don't know if this is worse or better. We'll find out. I will say another like good thing that has come about because of this, or probably will come about rather, is that it kind of will expel these neo-Catholics who are in this very comfortable position where they can at one hand obey Rome and her magisterium, and at the other hand they can still have the Latin Mass. Unfortunately now they can't have their cake and eat it too. They can have their Reverend Mass, the Latin Mass. They understand that this is this Mass contains the dogma of the Church, the Definia Divina of the Church, or they have to, and then they would have to disobey what the Pope is saying, or rather what the person of the Pope is saying. The Pope, the office of the Apostolic See, could never make such a claim like this. It contradicts the natural law, as I will talk about. Alright, so let's just get right into that then. And so now it forces these neo-trads to either recognize that there needs to be resistance within the Church, and then they'll either become like a Society of St. Pius X, or they'll join some like other group that is resisting these changes. At least they'll have to acknowledge that the Society of St. Pius X is in the right for doing what they did. So we'll see what happens, but I guess is that they'll probably go that direction, and so we'll see a large blossoming of the St. Pius X. And then the Pope will probably like condemn or excommunicate everyone in the society or do something like that. Once he's corralled all the traditionalists into one group, now that there will be out of the Novus Ordo like auspices and the hierarchy, then he will just like try to claim that they're in some parallel and irregular status. All right, so let's talk about what is the Latin Mass, and then I'll go into Quo Premium because it kind of establishes something that's always been there. And to understand what the Latin Mass is, you have to understand what the liturgy is. The liturgy isn't something that is just simply a disciplinary teaching. That is something that is often thought. I was reading, prepare for my spiel. I was reading a bunch of like things that were opposed to my ideas, and almost all of them were like saying that, oh, the Pope can change the liturgy however he likes because he is the control of the church, and the liturgy is simply a disciplinary motive, and the disciplinary teachings of the church can be subject to reform and whatever. And it's true that the disciplinary teachings can, but the Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, is not simply a disciplinary teaching of the church. It is much deeper than that. In fact, it is the dogma, it is the doctrine of the church, the de fide divina, as it is often said. That is the faith from God, basically passed down through symbols. The church has used symbols to basically express in the liturgy these profound truths, and that is why the church fathers and St. Pius V said, lex orandi est lex credendi. The law of faith, or rather the law of prayer, is the law of belief. When we pray a certain way, we believe that way. And that is why when we think about sacred tradition, when we talk about sacred tradition, we talk about the deposit of faith, those things which the apostles were inspired to believe by the Holy Ghost, and those things which came from the lips of our Lord Jesus Christ, some of which were written down and put into the Holy Scriptures, other things that were passed down orally. Well, these orally passed down things, a lot of people think that they're just in like the homilies of St. John Chrysostom or the letters of St. Ignatius of Loyola or something like that, but no, they were passed down through the rite of the church, the rites, that is to say the symbols, they were contained within the symbols of the sacred liturgy, within the prayers of the sacred liturgy. And that is why, for example, the Immaculate Conception, long before it was declared officially a dogma and proposed by the church as something that was binding on all the faithful, it was contained in the Mass. That is why in the Mass is contained all the theological virtues, it contains the whole sacrifice, it contains the Pentecost, it contains everything that is part of the deposit of faith. And this isn't like my opinion here. I'll read off some of the church fathers demonstrating this, as well as some theologians who spoke similarly, like more recent theologians. But here are some of the fathers of the church speaking about this. St. Basil, quote, speaks of, quote, a tacit and mystical tradition maintained down to our own times, and to a secret instruction that our fathers observed without discussion, and which we follow by dwelling in their simplicity of their silence. In other words, the reason why they used the symbols of the Mass, and because they didn't like to write things down. If they wrote things down, then they could fall into the wrong hands. This was called the discipline of the secret. I've talked about it many times before, and it's linked with esotericism, but that's not really the discussion today. For they understood how necessary was silence in order to maintain the respect and veneration due to our holy mysteries. And in fact, it was not proper to make known in writing a doctrine containing things that catechumens are not permitted to contemplate. And so instead of writing down the whole deposit of faith, they passed it down orally through these liturgical rites and expressions and the symbols within these expressions. Another saint, Saint Dionysius the Areopagite, says, quote, salvation is possible only for deified souls. Deification is something I talk about a lot on this show, but that's not tonight's topic. And deification is nothing else but the union and resemblance we strive to have with God. The things that are bestowed uniformly and all at once, so to speak, on the blessed essences dwelling in heaven are transmitted to us, as it were, in fragments and through the multiplicity of the varied symbols of the divine oracles. For it is on these divine oracles that our hierarchy is founded, And by these words we mean not only what our inspired masters have left us in the holy epistles and their theological works, but also what they transmitted to their disciples by a kind of spiritual and almost heavenly teaching, initiating them from person to person in a bodily way, no doubt. And when it says initiating them from person to person, it's talking about the whole rites of the church. It talks about the rite of confirmation and baptism and the entire Eucharistic service. That is the rites of initiation there. And so it's this heavenly teaching, according to Saint Dionysius. It transmits the teachings of heaven, the heavenly teaching, as he says. He continues saying, since they spoke, but I venture to say in an immaterial way also, since they did not write. In other words, that the tradition of the church, the tradition with a capital T, not just you dip your water in the holy water and you cross yourself, that tradition, but the tradition with a capital T, the truth that God has revealed, the special revelation, that is all been contained immaterially and passed down in the liturgy. But since these truths had to be translated into the usages of the church, the apostles expressed them under the veil of symbols and not in their sublime nakedness. For not everyone is holy, and the scriptures say, knowledge is not for all. End quote. So in other words, they use the liturgy, the symbols of the liturgy, to transmit these symbols, which point to these higher metaphysical truths. And the East, they have their own liturgy, they have their own symbols, but it's the exact same way. That is why the Eastern rites are just as valid and licit as the Western ones, though the Eastern Orthodox are in schism. The Eastern Catholics, for example, like the Byzantine Rite, and the Coptic Rite, something just fell. Anyway, they are, just as much, they contain the deposit of faith as the Latin Rite. They came from the apostles, and basically it was just different symbols, but it's the same meaning, the same underlying meaning contained in the liturgy. And that was all that Quo Premium did and the Council of Trent did, is it codified these symbols in the liturgy as saying that this truly does contain the deposit of faith. And while there may be some changes, some accidental changes, both before Quo Premium and after Quo Premium, they did not change the essential constitution. That is to say, the meaning behind the symbols contained in the Mass did not change those whatsoever. The Novus Ordo, though, completely different story. They started a completely new rite. And that is not my opinion. That is what Cardinal Ratzinger, and the theologian, later became Pope Benedict. But when he was a theologian, he said that the new Mass in Vatican II was ground zero. It was the start of a new rite. I have another quote here on that, since I wanted to make sure that covered all my bases. Let's see, where was it? Yes, so here is this is Father Joseph Gallinou. I don't know, some French name, I think. He says the Roman Rite, as we know it, no longer exists, has been destroyed. Some walls of the former edifice have fallen, while others have changed their appearance to the extent that it appears today either as a ruin or the partial substructure of a different building. The Mass of Paul the 4th or 6th is a very new Mass. That's what Novus means, new. It's a new Mass, it's a new rite. It does not contain the deposit of faith. It does not transmit it the way that the old Mass did. And the idea that the Church could reject it, to abrogate it, is ridiculous. It would say that the Church could do something that would contradict its very function and purpose on this earth. Go back, watch my stream I did on the Pope and on the Church. I kind of tried to do a little bit of a what do they call that again? Let me make this full screen. I don't need this anymore. I tried to get people to click on the video, do some clickbait by saying it's the best proof for the authority of the Church. Probably not, but anyway, it was a clickbait video title. So you should watch the video, the clickbait title. But the video is good, and it's all about where the Church and why the Church has authority, and it's basically there in order to supply the form for to propose the proper interpretation or the form of special revelation or the deposit of faith. It's often been called the Divina, or rather De Fide Divina et Ecclesiasticus, the faith from God, the divine faith from God and the Church. And that is the essential constitution of the church. And so the church can codify it, and it can propose to the faithful a proper interpretation. That is its function. But the idea that the church could turn its back on this tradition is anathema. It is basically to say that the church is somehow defected in its mission, but that is impossible. Christ said to St. Peter that the gates of hell would never prevail against thee. The church is indefectible. It cannot defect. That is impossible for the church to defect. And so if the church cannot defect, that means it cannot lose sight of its mission, and therefore it cannot reject the deposit of faith. It cannot turn its back on it. And just as if a father, and this is just simply a principle of the natural law, if a father was to act in a certain manner, which would betray the function of fatherhood, which is to say, namely, to supply virtue for the children, to encourage and to raise children in virtue. If, for example, a father were to tell his daughter that she should become a prostitute in order to help pay for her college, she should start an OnlyFans or something like that, the daughter should reject that message, belay that order, because that order does not come from the authority of the father as such, but rather from the person who is the father, frankly, and because the father is acting contrary to the function for which he has been given authority. That is just the natural. That is natural that he is impounded himself if he is acting in a way that is contrary to the very reason he has been given authority. The same is true of civil government. The purpose of civil government is to act towards the common good. As St. Thomas Aquinas teaches, if the state acts in a way that is contrary to the common good, that is contrary to what is best for the faith and for the well-being of the society, then the state can be ignored. We can reject what the state is doing because it has no authority. It does not come from God. It comes from the individuals within the state. And the same is true of the church. This is just a principle of natural law, that the church is acting in a way that is contrary to the good of the faithful, is contrary to the deposit of faith, trying to abrogate it or trying to in any way diminish it. Then the church is not acting, or the Pope is not acting in his authority as the head of the apostolic see, but rather is acting simply as the person of Bergoglio or the person of Francis. He's not acting as the Pope. He's acting as simply Francis. This Francis writing this. This is not something that can have any authority, because if it did, it would imply that the church has defected, which is metaphysically impossible. And this is not my opinion. The natural law is something that is written on the hearts of every man. That is why something I saw that people say, oh, are you an individualist since you say that you yourself can interpret the Pope or something like that? No, I'm not an individualist. The function of the church comes from right reason, just as the existence of God comes from right reason. This is something that is manifest and can be known to all men. And the natural law is written on all men's heart. This is something that is universal, not individual. And it's contrary to the natural law to say that something which is betrayed and to undermine its proper function has any utility. If something is like, if we're using our sexual organs towards means or towards a function, or towards a means that is abrogates its proper function, then it has no utility. It is acting wrongly. The same is true of any institution, including the church. And Quo Premium basically codifies these symbols that transmit the dogma of faith, the fide divina, the eternal teaching of the church. That is basically the purpose, and the idea that Quo Premium could ever be abrogated would be like saying that the Galatian decrees were the decrees that codified the canon of the New Testament. Obviously, contained within the canon of the New Testament is the deposit of faith, part of it at least. And the same is true of the Mass. The Mass contains the deposit of faith. The Tridentine Mass contains the deposit of faith. And to say that the papal bull, which is codifying it, can somehow be abrogated is equivalent to saying that we could somehow reform the decrees of the Galatian documents, basically to say that our canon of the New Testament is somehow mistaken or flawed. And that's simply anathema. It's ridiculous. It's preposterous. And that is why the Council of Trent In canon or session 7, canon 13, it says, in no uncertain terms, if anyone saith that the received and approved rites of the Catholic Church, and that is what Quo Premium says to do, is to say what is and to define what the approved rites of the Catholic Church is, won't to be used in the solemn administration of the sacraments, may be contemned, or without sin be omitted at pleasure by the ministers, or be changed by every pastor of the church into other new rites, let him be anathema. This is a solemn condemnation. It is infallible. And it says in no uncertain terms that these are the approved rites of the church and that they cannot be changed. And so what does that mean exactly? That is what Quo Premium sets out to do. Quo Premium basically, its task and purpose is to explain what does this mean, this part, what does change mean, minister mean, etc. And basically says that no one, unless they are the Pope himself, can even alter the Mass. It says that earlier. And if they do, it could not be like the essential constitution of the Mass has to remain the same. And this is kind of the relevant part to our discussion. The document says, furthermore, by these presents, this law, in virtue of our apostolic authority, the Pope here is basically reminding us that he's speaking on with the authority of the apostles. We grant and concede in perpetuity that in perpetuity, meaning this is something that continues forever, that for the chanting or reading of the Mass in any church whatsoever, this missal, the Tridentine Missal, is hereafter to be followed absolutely without any scruple of conscience or fear of incurring any penalty, judgment, or censure, and may freely and lawfully be used. So it can be used by any priest without censure or without fear. That is what the Pope is saying. That is what he's codifying here in no uncertain terms. Nor are superiors, administrators, canons, chaplains, and other secular priests or religious or whatever title designated, and I guess that would include Pope, obliged to celebrate the Mass otherwise than as enjoined by us. We likewise declare and ordain that no one whosoever is forced or coerced to alter this missal and this present document cannot be revoked or modified. This present document, Quo Premium, cannot be revoked or modified. And then it gives like the one exception, which is rites that were 200 years or older, basically saying that if there's a rite that is 200 years or older, then he will allow it, basically like the Ambrosian Rite or the Dominican Rite, because it's basically the same underlying message. It just contains slightly different symbols. Same underlying message though. And the reason why the church codified the Mass is because there had been so much variation. The church wanted to remain united in its message, and so it made that very clear. And they wanted one missal. And they didn't want all these variations, and the message was starting to change as more and more variations and the symbols came about. It was losing track of its original deposit of faith, which undergirded the entire thing. And so that is why the Pope acted the way he did, in accordance with the Council of Trent. And it ends here, therefore no one whosoever is permitted to alter this notice of our permission, statute, ordinance, command, precept, grant, indult, declaration, will, decree, and prohibition. But anyone whosoever presume to commit such an act, he should know that he will incur the wrath of Almighty God and of the blessed apostles Peter and Paul. Amen. So powerful. And popes they spoke a lot of authority and a lot of charisma back in these days. But yes, very strongly says that this is a permission, it is a statute, it is an ordinance, it is a command, it is a precept, it is a prohibition, and it cannot be revoked. And even like Pope Francis doesn't even try here. He says the only thing that is also included is customs. He says that the previous norms, customs, permissions, etc. That do not conform are abrogated. But he doesn't even try to abrogate Quo Premium. Not that he could. Like I mentioned, it would be like abrogating the Galatian decrees. That would imply some very serious ramifications that are metaphysically impossible. But instead, rather, Or rather, instead, the only thing that is similar is see, I think it was permission. I think permission is the only thing that is in both of these, and the permission is two separate meanings. Here, permissions is we're talking about the permissions and summorum pontificum. The permissions here are the permissions for the Ambrosian Rite, the Dominican Rite, etc. Those are the very two different permissions. So they're not speaking about the same thing. So this entirely implies it's never been abrogated. Some people said it's implicitly been abrogated, but like I said, that would be basically impossible since this codifies the Mass. This is the Apostolic Constitution. I recommend reading through this whole thing. It's very well written, but it basically says that the Pope, when he's acting as he just has, is acting contrary to his natural function as Pope, the one who's supposed to protect and transmit and conserve the dogma of faith. He can propose to the faithful the proper interpretation of the dogma of faith. He can provide sacraments in order to assist the faithful in living out the dogma of faith. He can provide pastoral teaching in order to accommodate the faithful in their walk and the life of holiness. But he cannot just try to in any way turn his back on the fide divina. Like I said, that would be contrary to the natural law. And this is something that theologians have said. I have a quote here from a theologian, P. Herman. This was in 1908. He says that the church is infallible. Inner discipline follows from her very mission. The church's mission is to preserve the integral faith and to lead people to salvation by teaching them to preserve whatever Christ commanded. Christ's commands are in the deposit of faith, basically. But if she were able to prescribe or command or tolerate in her discipline something against faith or morals, which would be the abrogation of the Latin Mass, it would be something against faith or morals, or something which tended to the detriment of the church or to the harm of the faithful, the church would turn away from her divine mission, which would be impossible. And that's from Institutiones Theologiae Dogmaticae. So that's just like one theologian. I know this is just like opinion, but just to back up basically what I'm saying, this is something that is very serious. And like I said, lex orandi est lex credendi. The law of faith is the law of belief. The way we pray is the way we believe. And when the prayer we have contains the deposit of faith, the way people are going to believe is going to be orthodox. It is going to be in line with what the church has always taught. And if you change that or you try to provide some new rite, then there's a good chance that the beliefs of the faithful are going to be heterodox or heretical, since they're not being inundated with the proper symbols and the meaning behind the symbols. Because, like, even for example, I think Dr. Chandler Marshall brought this up. I thought it was a great point. Like Joan of Arc, she was illiterate. She went to mass and she was baptized. And when she was being tried by the Bishop of France, they couldn't get her on anything theological. Her theology was rock solid. This is the case for a lot of the Catholic faithful throughout the ages. Their faith was rock solid. They didn't understand Latin, but that's okay. If they did understand Latin, then these things that were of divine origin would be laid bare, as Saint Dionysius says to these catechumens, and that is something that would be very unbecoming of them. That's not their proper place. However, through this kind of interaction with the symbols, they're able to almost so unconsciously be able to transmit the faith into their lives, be able to assimilate the faith into their lives, because of just like the reverence. For example, like what I mean by symbols, just to make it more concrete, is for example when the Holy Eucharist is being consecrated and the Pope genuflects before it, and when he lifts it up and you can just see the reverence that he's put into it, it just strikes you that this is not just ordinary bread. And the fact that the priest genuflects many times, it really like rings forward again. These people, young people, old people, people who might not know Latin, they can see what's happening. They're able to follow what's happening at the altar. They know that this is a sacrifice. They can see that the priest is interacting with God, that this is heaven on earth. And they're able to understand this. Even if they don't understand all the metaphysics, even if they don't understand all the meaning behind all the various symbols and the words, it doesn't matter. as Jesus said, do not throw your pearls before swine, and that which is holy before dogs. So I think it's important to keep these things in Latin and to keep these things kind of hidden away. And I think it's something that Novus Ordo did very wrong by trying to make it too intelligible to the faithful. And this is manifestly clear in just like statistical evidence. I pulled up this Pew Research study, just interviewing your average American Catholic, those who attend the Novus Ordo Missae and those who attend the traditional Latin Mass. And here are some key findings. 2% of TLM attending Catholics approved of contraception versus 89, almost 90% of the Novus Ordo Missae Catholics approve of contraception. Contraception is a mortal sin. It's contrary to the natural law. I can't believe it. This is ridiculous. But only 2%, which is probably like one person, of TLM attending Catholics approved of contraception. 89% of the Novus Ordo Catholics approved. 1% of TLM Catholics approved of abortion. Abortion is a grave evil. It is literally murder. And if you support it, then you are evil. And you are under the influence of Satan. 1% of TLM Catholics approved of abortion compared to 51% of Novus Ordo Missae attendees. 51%. That's over half of so-called Catholics reject basic Catholic teaching. 99% of TLM Catholics said they attend Mass weekly, which is amazing. 99%. That's awesome, they say. As Mass, if you like physically can't, then you obviously have a dispensation. But if you can't attend Mass, there is a Sunday obligation, penalty of mortal sin, to not attend Mass on Sunday. And on the antithesis side, we have 22% of Novus Ordo Missae attendees who go to Mass weekly. It's probably even less now after COVID. 2% of TLM goers approved of gay marriage, as opposed to 67% of Novus Ordo Missae attendees. Again, this is just crazy. 67%. It's like 2/3. And this wasn't on here, but it was like 2/3 of I think 2/3 of Novus Ordo attending Catholics like also denied transubstantiation. Like they just like flat out rejected transubstantiation, which is one of the most important dogmas of the church. It's one of the most important sacraments of the church. It is necessary to receive Holy Communion in order for there to be a full and proper transmutation of the soul, and so that we can receive theosis, receive deification, and we can rise again on the third day. As Jesus said, anyone who does not consume my body, does not eat my flesh and blood, will have no life in them, and I will not be able to raise them up on the third day. Rather, not on the third day, but raise them to new life. When we receive the body of Jesus, his divinity, his soul, we are able to take on ourselves the ability to rise again, to have a bodily resurrection. And that is what we'll have on the last day. That is why Jesus had to rise again, and that is why we receive Holy Communion. Here's another point. Also, the rate of giving among TLM Catholics, which was nearly 6 times the amount of giving as the Novus Ordo parishioners. TLM Catholics also had a fertility rate of 3.6 versus 2.3 for Novus Ordo Missae, indicating a nearly 60% larger family size, which is, I think this is to be expected, though. I think that most people are like, wow, it's awesome, the Latin Mass, it clearly draws in the right people, and I don't think it's necessarily that it draws in the right people. I think it's just the law of prayer is the law of belief. When you see the priest genuflecting, when you see your parents kneeling in Mass, and when you're like a kid, these instill in you the proper mindset, the proper the reverence that these things have. And so then when you're finally catechized, you go to catechism classes, everything makes a lot more sense, and you actually internalize the teachings of the church. Whereas if you go to the Novus Ordo Missae, everything feels like a rock concert. Some of them might be like that, or a Protestant service, and then you have your priest, and if the priest doesn't even say like like, for example, I went to a Novus Ordo confession one time, and the priest was he made up his own words of, I'm getting a phone call, what the heck? I'm sorry about that. Alright, so I gotta turn off my phone next time, put it on like silent. That ringtone, it was from ReZero. It's a great story behind that ringtone, but that's for another time. All right, sorry. I know I've been going for a long time, but I'm almost done. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so I went to this Novus Ordo confession, and the priest just made up his own words of absolution. And like he did, I think he did the last part right. The I absolve you in the name of the Father, and the Holy Ghost, but the rest of it was just like made up. And I was just like, what is this guy doing? And I realized that if priests are just making up the words, and it's sends this message to the faithful that the rites, the approved rites and traditions of the church just do not matter. It does not matter. You can do whatever you want, you know, you can kind of be free, you kind of be your own individual, you know, if you don't like this part of the church, you can kind of just reject it. It's not a big deal, you know. You can say, I'm mostly Catholic, I just don't like this one thing about gay marriage or abortion or contraception, but for the most part, I'm Catholic. But that's not how it works. You reject one part of the law, you reject the whole law, as the scriptures say. You reject one teaching of the Catholic Church, one dogmatic teaching, you've rejected the entire principle on which the Church is founded, which is to say that it is the proper interpreter, that it proposes to us as binding the proper interpretation of the faith. De fide divina et ecclesiasticus. The divine faith and of the Church, of God from the Church. All right. So yes, it is. It's very important to preserve the Latin Mass. Yes, it's from ReZero. I'm glad people recognized it. All right, so kind of threw me off the ringtone, but yes, the Latin Mass is something that is the approved rite of the Church, and it will continue in perpetuity. It must continue in perpetuity, and the Pope cannot abrogate it. He is just because he would not be acting as Pope. And some people have said, oh, so is he an anti-Pope then? And this is an argument I hear from a lot of sedevacantists, that he must not be Pope. And I think this is very wildly imprudent for two reasons. Well, actually, it really depends on what kind of sedevacantist you are. There are these, what you might call I'm not trying to say totalitarian, but like totalitarians. I don't know, but like they believe the papacy is entirely vacant since John the 23rd, and for that reason, there is basically no visible head of the church, and the church requires a visible head. Watch my video on the papacy for that. If there is no pope in office, there must be some process that was left by the prior pope to establish a new pope. But the last, like, according to these sedevacantists, the last true pope was Pius XII, and his process to choose the next pope was for the cardinals to decide. He's sitting cardinals to decide. Well, all the cardinals... What's my dog doing? Alright, sorry, I have my dog in my room too. All the cardinals are dead. They're all defunct, so it looks like there's no pope going forward, and that would be impossible. There must be a visible head of the church or some visible way for there to be a pope. And that is also affirmed in Vatican I. It says that the papacy will continue in perpetuity. Another like group of sedevacantists are called sedepravationists. They think that the pope has, I think, the form of the papacy, but not the matter. I understand them correctly. And so the pope is like, he's been sworn in as pope, but as soon as he gets into office, he's impounded, just like the Eastern Orthodox bishops have no authority because they're schismatics and heretics. Since the pope is like according to them, a heretic, which is something I'm very careful of because there's two kinds of heresy. Then he is impounded, which may be true, but I think it's very imprudent to go to those conclusions, because if he is the true pope and you reject him and try to create your own parallel church, you're incurring upon yourself schism, so I wouldn't recommend that. There's also, again, there's two kinds of heresy. There's a material heresy, which is like, I think most of these Catholics that I'm reading off, that they go against what the church teaches, but they think they're doing the right thing. And then there's formal heresy, which is, this is what the church teaches, but instead of doing the right thing, I'm going to reject it outright. And since I cannot judge the Pope, I cannot judge no one, not even the church can judge the secret things. The mind is incorrigible, and there's a private access, so I have no idea if the Pope is, knows what he is doing is contrary to Quo Premium. I have no idea. So I think it's most charitable and most prudent to assume that he simply thinks he is, doing what is best for the church based on whatever, assumptions he grew up with. But just objectively speaking, he's not. As well as the Vatican I also said that if anyone says that the form and matter of the papacy can be separated, let him be anathema. So the idea that you can even separate the two is just seems impossible to begin with. So that is like my response, I guess you could say, to sedevacantism, as I think it's very wildly imprudent, and I don't see why you need to have that either. I think you can say that your father is still your father, but we can resist him when he does something that is contrary to when he tries to promulgate something that's contrary to his proper function. The same is true with the state. It's still the state. It's still your father. He's no longer becomes an anti-father. And the state no longer becomes some like pseudo state or something like that. It still is the state, even if it asks you to do something wrong. The civil state that I'm talking about there. And the same is true with the church and the pope. The church and the pope can still retain their ecclesiastical and magisterial authority, while at the same time they might release something that is it is impossible that it comes from their authority, but rather it just comes from their person, based again on just the natural law. The fact that they are trying to, in some way, the church is in some way trying to defect from her mission, as that theologian said, which is impossible. The mission to transmit, preserve, and to propose to the faithful the proper interpretation of the De Fide Divina, which is contained in symbols in the proper and approved rites of the church, codified at the Council of Trent and in Quo Premium. So that's my response to sedevacantism. I know someone asked about that. Let's see, was there other people responding, or there was another question this guy had. I'm responding to this gentleman's question yesterday. He asked some great questions. I think I touched on almost all of them. Oh, he asked about, I think, pedophiles in the papal office as well, and my response to that is the Latin phrase, I forget how it goes, but it means something like, an inference to an abuse is not an excuse to cancel. Like an inference to an abuse within the church is not an excuse to cancel the church. An inference to abuse of some rite is not an excuse to cancel this rite. It's simply just that it is an abuse. And it does not mean that they don't have authority. It just means that they're not immaculate, and we want to expect them to always be immaculate, especially in times like now when the church is going through a passion. That's not to say it's a good thing or we should tolerate it, but it doesn't mean that this is not a defeater for the Catholic Church. As well as I remember this great quote I saw a bunch of people tweeting it out, and it says basically I am bound by the church, by the teaching of the church, to believe that she is indefectible, infallible, visible, etc. But for someone outside the church, the best proof that the church is divinely ordained is the fact that it has remained in existence despite the knavish, I think that's the word he uses, knavish ignorance and foolishness of the people who are running it. Somehow the church has survived 2,000 years despite these very sometimes evil men in our charge, oftentimes imprudent or foolish or unwise, these very incompetent leaders, and yet the church has survived. Unlike other institutions, like for example Protestantism, which is split over time and time again into smaller and smaller sub-factions, and it's I would say they're a bit I don't know, their leaders are probably you can point to some of them and say that they're more competent than some Catholics. They're more sincere, they're not pedophiles, they're not X, Y, or Z. They at least they believe what their church teaches. They're sincere about their faith, even if they're maybe ignorant about the truth of the Catholic Church. So in some sense you might say that they're more competent, but despite that, their church is still fractured and broken. Let's see, anything else they say? And one more thing to think about, just to reflect on, is the fact that the church is meant to be a place for sinners. It's not as it sometimes is said, a hotel for saints, but it's a hospital for sinners. So we should expect that there are going to be people in the church that are not going to be great, and we have to pray that those people convert, and that through the sacraments they're able to be restored in a life of grace and in holiness. And that is fundamentally how we have to act going forward. We're in dark times, and the only way that you guys can resist this as lay people is by being a saint, is by living a godly life, by not indulging in the pleasures of the world, by not giving into despair, by not being blackpilled, but to live a saintly life, to hold on to the faith, to teach your children, if you have children, to pray the rosary, to attend Latin Mass. If you've never been to a Latin Mass, this is the time to go. Now is the time to go. Pope Francis has declared war on the Latin Mass, which means it is time for you to go to the Latin Mass. If you've never been before, make it clear to the bishops that this is something that is good and beneficial and efficacious, and something that is filled with so many graces by attending the Latin Mass. Let them know. And write to them. If your bishop kept the Latin Mass, say thank you. If he's indeterminate, ask him to keep it. If he, I will be doing this myself. I'll probably send an email out to him tonight, or like a phone call or something like that. If he has already abrogated it, don't be rude. Don't give in to being uncharitable. You don't want to go to hell over this document, okay? Do not let Satan win. That is what you need to get out of this. Do not let Satan win. Keep the faith. Live a holy life to the best of your ability, because in the end, you're going to be judged not on what the Pope does, not on what Francis has done, not on Vatican II. You'll be judged on what you have done, what I have done. I will be judged too. I'm speaking to myself as well. I'm not trying to school marm you guys, but I will be judged on what I have done. You'll be judged on what you have done. So we have to focus on our own personal holiness. We have to live holy lives, saintly lives, and that is the way in which we can resist and that we can respond to these things. And in the end, we will win. We know that. We can be assured of that. But for the time being, we must retain the faith. We must promote the faith. We must conserve the faith. And if Rome, the bishops, will not decry these abuses and this heresy, then the priests need to decry this abuse and this heresy. And if the priests don't decry this, then the deacons must. And if the deacons don't do this, then the lay people have to. And so send letters to your bishops. If they've abrogated the Mass, ask them to rescind that decision or rethink it. But be charitable. We have to be charitable. We have to be a light, like a lighthouse. We have to be shining examples of what Christianity looks like. And for that reason, I'm going to really work on, I'm not going to try to swear anymore. That's something I'm going to really try to work on. This is own personal. I don't think swearing is intrinsically evil, but just to better foster, I think, charity in my own life. This is something I'm doing. It's an example. I'm not saying you guys have to all emulate that, but for me, I'm going to try to really work on that. Try to be charitable. Try to always look at things in the best light. To the best with the help of God's grace, of course. I'm not capable of doing that on my own. But just little things like this. And in order to better reflect the grace of God, the charity of God, the love of God to everyone I meet. It's not easy. I obviously fail all the time, but it's something that we must do. That, if you want to know how to respond, if you want to know how can we save the church, how can we help out, what can I do? This is what you can do. Live a saintly life. Pray the rosary. Love God. Teach the faith to your kids. Hold on to it. It's not it sounds simple, but it's incredibly difficult in this modern age. It's incredibly, you're taking an incredible stand as well. But it's something that we will be rewarded for, either in this life, when you see the restoration of the church, or in the next, when you're rewarded in heaven for your continence and for your virtue. In either case, we will have the last word. God will have the last word. Satan will not. We can always be assured of that. And that is just a metaphysically true. Vincit omnia veritas. Truth conquers all things. The things of this world, things that are material, are forever divisible, and will forever cascade into this downward motion, this downward degeneration, and eventually it'll rupture and it'll collapse on itself without any firm foundation. The church is founded on Christ, which is the truth. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And his foundation has no end. It has no means or way to rupture, and so the church will last. The true church will last forever, and we must be obedient to the, not to the modernists in Rome, but to the eternal Rome. to the Rome that has always existed and has always teach the true faith. We must be obedient to that. And if we do that, friends, then we can see a change in the present state of things, and we can make a difference in our own lives and the lives of those around us and meet us. And if enough of us do this, we can change the culture of the church. And like I said, if we're not awarded in this life, we'll be in the next. So there's no downsides. It's all upsides. Don't be blackpilled. Don't give in to despair. That is the main message today. So thank you guys for listening. I think I covered everything I wanted to talk about. But don't apostatize. I know it's hard. And I see this guy's comment. He's like, it's real difficult to be a conservative, a traditionalist right now. I understand. It can be hard. Do not give in to Satan. You think your viewers have kids? Asks Orange. Some of them. Yeah, some of them do. I forget that guy's name, but I remember him bringing up that he had kids. Yeah, my cousin has kids. He watches the show. So yes, there are people with kids that watch the show. Great young families. That's what we need. Great young families. So thank you guys for listening. I'm going to stop the recording here because we've gone on 1 hour and 45 minutes. So long. So please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We just broke 600 and now we're like exactly at 600. I'm teetering on the edge. If I lose any more subscribers, I'll go below. So please subscribe. That would be greatly appreciated to the YouTube channel, Anime Rightist. God bless you guys. I appreciate it.